What's up guys, my name is Ace, and Season 3 for Black Ops 6 is now live, and while we have already covered all of the non-weapon balancing changes that came with this update a couple days ago, I did want to hold off on covering the weapon balancing changes, since of course I wanted to do the actual before and after testing to show you guys exactly what this looks like before and after, so that's what we're going to be going over in today's video. This is quite a big update, with some pretty major changes here that are going to be mixing up the meta to a degree, so let's just dive right into it and start it off with the assault rifle category. And with the XM4's 3-round burst mod specifically, they buffed our burst delay. Previously, it was 160 milliseconds. Now it's just 140 milliseconds. And what this means is our new time to kill potential with a 4-shot kill is 365 milliseconds rather than 385. That's still quite a slow time to kill in this game, but if you manage to land just one headshot mixed in with 2 body shots, you can get a 150 millisecond time to kill, just like pre-patch. Next up, with the GPR91, in an update a little while ago, they actually broke the visual recoil and reverted it back to the original values, and as you can see, the sights were shaking around like crazy when you're shooting. With this update, they have fixed this so it's now in line with the other guns in the game, and you can see there's a lot less shake. Recoil pattern itself hasn't changed here. This is all purely visual, but this was definitely a welcome fix, especially for those of us using iron sights. Also, you might have noticed in that pre-patch footage that bullet holes are no longer appearing on my recoil wall that I've been using since launch, so you might notice for many of the recoil plots throughout the rest of the video, I had to find other locations at the exact same distance though to do this testing. As for the next adjustment, this was probably the biggest overall adjustment to a gun throughout this entire update. This is with the Goblin Mark II. They massively buffed the rate of fire up to 600 rounds per minute by default, or 667 rounds per minute if you use rapid fire. However, to compensate for that, of course, they had to nerf the damage value, so it is going to take you an extra shot to kill with this much higher fire rates. And unfortunately, this does mean that we are getting a slower time to kill potential overall compared to pre-patch. But on top of this, they did slightly buff our aim down sight time, and they also increased our range values. So again, it is going to take you 4 shots rather than 3 to the body now, but our ranges are slightly better, and also in that maximum damage range, even without the CHF barrel, we only need 1 headshot mixed in with a couple body shots to reduce the number of shots to kill, so headshots are technically more effective in that sense. And personally, while this is technically a nerf to our raw time to kill potential, I'm really happy to see this just because we finally have a high fire rate cap semi-auto in the game that will actually put our trigger finger to the test. And it is worth noting, while they didn't mention any changes to recoil, if you increase rate of fire without touching recoil, you're obviously going to see more recoil overall, and that's exactly what we're seeing here with the Goblin Mark II. However, it is worth noting, it does appear that they cut down on that first shot recoil a little bit. We're seeing less of that post-patch compared to pre-patch. And in a way, I actually see that as a buff to recoil rather than a nerf here. It's a little bit more accurate because you don't have to deal with quite as much of a jump after that first shot. Now, every shot after that, of course, there's going to be less time for each shot to recenter, but it's still quite manageable recoil in my opinion. As for the AS-VAL, it actually caught quite a nice buff to its maximum damage range, or its 5-shot kill range. That's a very noticeable buff for sure. And then on top of that, they improved our base walking speed and our aim walking speed by just a little bit. And they also reduced some of the penalties to recoil that you get with the CHF barrel. And as you can see, pre-patch versus post-patch, it is noticeably more accurate with the CHF barrel. And that covers it for the assault rifle changes. Now let's move on to SMGs, and the first adjustment here was to the Tanto 22 binary trigger mod. They actually made several adjustments to this. The first thing is they slightly buffed all of our damage ranges. This is a much more subtle adjustment compared to the buff that we saw to the AS-VAL's range, but a buff nonetheless. And then on top of this, they buffed our headshot multiplier a little bit, and it turns out this only affects our maximum damage range, but now we are capable of getting a 3-shot kill if all 3 of those shots hit them in the head within the maximum damage range. Whereas previously, within that range, headshots were useless. And then finally, they did improve our recoil a bit when using the binary trigger. There still is a lot of recoil, like to the point where I can only do a 20-round recoil plot because the rest go above my recoil testing area, but you can see it is noticeably more accurate than it was pre-patch. After that, I know a lot of people are going to be happy to see this. There were some nerfs to the Jackal PDW SMG, and the first thing they did here is they nerfed all of our damage ranges a little bit. But especially with that 6-shot kill range, that was actually quite a notable nerf. The maximum damage range, less so. And interestingly, while they nerfed our headshot multiplier a little bit, they also buffed the base damage we deal at longer ranges. And while it's still going to be a 7-shot kill in that range, this actually overpowers the headshot nerf in the sense that headshots are more effective in that long range. We only need 2 without the CHF barrel or 1 with the CHF barrel to reduce the number of shots to kill. And no other ranges were affected by this headshot adjustment. Now after that, I was surprised to see they actually buffed our slide to fire and dive to fire times by 20 milliseconds in both cases on the Jackal PDW. And then finally, and I would say most importantly with the Jackal, they did nerf our recoil, and you can see a lot more horizontal deviation here. That's a much more extreme cut to the right after the first 6 or so shots that you fire. So it's actually going to be very noticeably less accurate. However, they did also slightly buff the vertical foregrip and ranger foregrip when it comes to improving our horizontal recoil. And as we can see here, especially with the vertical grip, there is definitely a slight improvement compared to pre-patch when using the vertical grip if we're just looking at horizontal recoil. But at the end of the day, we are seeing more vertical recoil overall due to that previous adjustment I mentioned. So at the end of the day, with these Jackal nerfs, nothing too major. It looks like this is still going to be a very solid SMG, but perhaps just not quite as versatile as it was pre-patch. And then finally, for the SMG category, the Kompakt 92's 3-round burst mod saw a buff to its recoil, and as you can see here, pre-patch versus post-patch, this is a very noticeable improvement to our accuracy, which combined with the previous buffs that this got a few weeks back, this is actually turning out to be a pretty solid option with the Kompakt 92. Now, let's move into the shotgun category, and they primarily focused on buffing the Dragon's Breath ammo as well as slugs. So starting it off with the Marine SP using Dragon's Breath, our maximum one-hit kill potential has been improved up to about 9.5 meters. And also in the minimum damage range, we're going to be dealing noticeably more damage out to a longer range. And theoretically, at least against somebody not using Flak Jacket, it will now only be a 2-shot kill if you allow some time for the burn damage to take place between shots, rather than up to a 3 to 4-shot kill. So still not incredibly powerful by any means, especially against Flak Jacket users, but noticeably better than it was pre-patch. Then when it comes to slugs, on the Marine SP, they didn't touch any damage values at all, so still all the same body multipliers, but there were some huge improvements to our range values. Like as you can see there, our maximum one-shot kill potential to the body, where we have to hit upper torso or upper arms, previously it was 12.7 meters, now it's 25.4 meters, so they've doubled that range. And then when it comes to our one-shot headshot potential, previously it was 25.4 meters, now it's 45.7 meters. So some really nice adjustments there to the slugs. And it's great to see that they actually have a place in the game now, and there are actual benefits to choosing this over just using the base buckshot with the Marine SP. But next, let's have a look at the ASG-89, and the first thing they did here is they buffed our rate of fire from 188 rounds per minute up to 200 rounds per minute, and rapid fire was also buffed a little bit as well. And this means our 2-shot time to kill potential is 300 milliseconds rather than 319 milliseconds. I think that was an appropriate change to this. Then we once again saw some buffs to Dragon's Breath. And the first thing to point out is we can now get a 1-shot kill at pretty much point blank range if we're using Dragon's Breath on this, whereas previously we couldn't. And in general, you're going to see some range improvements and general consistency improvements overall, but nothing too massive. It's not like this is suddenly going to become overpowered or anything. It's just going to be noticeably better than it was pre-patch. And then finally, we saw some buffs to these slugs for the ASG-89. And in this case, they actually buffed some of our damage multipliers as well. And a couple keys to point out, we can now get a 1-shot kill to the upper torso and upper arms out to 12.7 meters, whereas previously it was just 1.3 meters for a 1-shot body shot. And then when it comes to headshots, we can get a 1-shot headshot out to 19.1 meters, whereas previously it was just 15.2 meters. And if we use a CHF barrel, that now extends out to 35.6 meters, which is pretty crazy for a semi-auto shotgun. It's also got a significantly better 2-shot kill potential to the body, and just all around, the slugs on the ASG are going to be very noticeably better now compared to pre-patch, where they were practically useless. And then finally, the Maelstrom got some similar treatment here. With the Dragon's Breath ammo, you're going to see a bit more range, a little bit more consistency. Again, nothing too crazy here, but it should be more consistent overall. And more importantly, the slugs got some buffs, which I was surprised to see since the slugs on the Maelstrom pre-patch were actually pretty good in my eyes. Now, it's actually kind of scary how good they are. As we can see, our 2-shot kill potential to the torso now extends out to 25.4 meters, whereas previously it was just 14 meters. And keep in mind, with a 2-shot kill, we're killing in 180 milliseconds, which is significantly better than SMGs even, and this extends out to 25.4 meters. Additionally, we now have the ability to get a 1-shot headshot with the Maelstrom slugs out to 14 meters by default, or 25.4 meters if we use the CHF barrel. It's also never going to take you 5 shots to kill to the torso anymore. At most, it'll take you 4 shots to kill to the torso. So even at really long ranges, you're not going to be totally useless with this. And to top all of this off, there were some very noticeable improvements to our recoil when using slugs with the Maelstrom, even with the CHF barrel. As you can see, it's much more accurate and controllable than it was pre-patch. And this is actually looking pretty scary considering the time to kill potential. This is definitely something you're going to want to try out post-patch, because this is going to be better than most of the marksman rifles at being a marksman rifle, at least within about 25 meters. Now, speaking of marksman rifles, let's move on to that category. We saw a bunch of buffs here. The first one was with the DM10. They did increase our rate of fire from 300 rounds per minute up to 333 rounds per minute, meaning we can now get a 2-shot time to kill potential at 180 milliseconds, which again, just like I said with the Maelstrom, that's a very, very fast time to kill in this game. Much better than even SMGs up close. They also reduce the amount of flinch that you receive by default with the DM10 by 20%, so that's nice and helpful as well, because flinch is pretty high with marksman rifles. And then in the maximum damage range, we saw a buff to our damage value, and while it's still going to be a 2-shot kill to the body, just like it was pre-patch, with this change, if you use the CHF barrel, you're now capable of getting a 1-shot kill to the head in this maximum damage range, which is quite impressive considering the fire rate of this marksman rifle. Now, once again, with a rate of fire increase and no adjustments to our base recoil, it is worth looking at the recoil plot here, and you can see there's definitely less time for those shots to recenter, and therefore more climb overall. And with the CHF barrel, they actually nerfed this a little bit as well to compensate for the fact that you can now get a 1-shot headshot in the maximum damage range with the CHF barrel. So you're going to see quite a bit more recoil with that CHF barrel now on the DM10. But overall, these are some nice buffs to the DM10. It should be noticeably better. Next, let's talk about the Tsarkov 7.62. With this one, we also saw a rate of fire buff from 200 rounds per minute up to 231 rounds per minute, meaning our new time to kill potential with a 2-shot kill is 260 milliseconds rather than 300 milliseconds, so far more competitive there. And of course, with that rate of fire increase, we are going to be seeing more climb with our recoil, as expected, but our first shot recoil appears to be consistent with the pre-patch values. There's still a pretty big jump there, so you probably want to lean in the direction of the ported compensator for this one. After that, the AEK973 with the full auto mod in particular saw a slight recoil buff, and as you can see here, it is a little bit more accurate post-patch compared to pre-patch, but nothing too crazy here. And then finally, for weapon balancing changes, the TR2 got a good handful of buffs that were desperately needed for this gun in my eyes. The first buff was to our rate of fire. This went from 400 rounds per minute up to 480, meaning our new time to kill potential up close is 250 milliseconds, which is far more competitive than the 300 milliseconds pre-patch. They also reduce the amount of flinch that you receive by 40%, so a huge buff there. That's like building in a heavy stock almost, and that's going to help quite a bit with the TR2. Then we saw a buff to our maximum damage range, where one single headshot mixed in with a body shot will give us a 2-shot kill, which means with that headshot, it's going to be quite powerful out to a longer range. And they also buffed our slide to fire and dive to fire values by just a little bit, just 10 milliseconds. And then finally, with the TR2, again, well, they didn't adjust the recoil values. With that increased rate of fire, you are going to be seeing more recoil climb overall. So definitely something to consider there, but this is a huge net buff overall to the TR2. It's got a lot more power now post-patch compared to pre-patch. And with that, that's finally going to wrap it up for today's video on all of the weapon balancing adjustments that took place with the Season 3 updates. And in general, there's some excellent adjustments here. I love the fact that they buffed up essentially all of the marksman rifles in various ways. It's nice to see some buffs to slugs, especially on shotguns as well, since outside of the Maelstrom, they were just totally useless. Although I will admit, I'm a little bit worried about the post-patch Maelstrom, but we'll have to see if that actually ends up taking over at all. And then finally, again, I really like the fact that we now have a really fast fire rate semi-auto in the game with the Goblin Mark II. And while they did technically nerf its raw power, I just love that the option is now there to really test out our trigger fingers, and I'm looking forward to using that semi-auto going forward. Now, of course, these are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you guys feeling about all of the weapon balancing that took place with this Season 3 update? Do you guys think these were generally positive changes, or not so much? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.